The Granton
Do
Public
bikers ever
Library
help
looked like
kids
any
like
small-town refuge. Warm lights, worn carpet, the smell of old books. But 8-year-old Arlo Whitfield stood in the children's section, 23 pounds underweight, wearing split sneakers a size too small. 11 days from what his foster guardian had been researching as indoor hypothermia staging. For 11 months, 4 people tried to help him. A teacher, a school nurse, a librarian, a neighbor. Every attempt was intercepted by a man the community trusted completely. Then Arlo walked across that library and asked a scarred biker reading a Tom Clancy novel one question.
Do bikers
Do
ever help kids like me?
What the hell's Angel Sergeant heard in those 7 words would expose a network, save 4 lives, and prove that the person you're most afraid of might be exactly who you need. This is Arlo and Ironside's story, and what they discovered in a utility room would haunt prosecutors for years. If those words hit you the way they hit me, subscribe, because this story is only beginning. Drop your city in the comments. Now, back to that library. Do bikers ever help kids like me? 7 words, delivered in a voice so quiet, it barely carried 3 feet. But they landed like a hammer on Gideon Ironside Walsh's chest, because he'd heard that exact tone before, 26 years ago, in a different state, from his own 6-year-old son, Marcus, 3 days before the foster system lost the paperwork twice, and Marcus died in a placement Gideon had been fighting to get him out of while deployed in the Gulf. It was 4:23 p.m. Tuesday, January 14th. Granton Public Library, 847 Elm Commons Road, Indiana. Outside, the first heavy snowfall of the year was just beginning. Temperature 19 degrees, wind chill down to 7. Inside, 6 people occupied the building. 2 elderly men reading newspapers, a mother with a toddler, 1 teenager wearing headphones, the librarian at the front desk, and Gideon, who'd been sitting on the vestibule bench for the past 40 minutes, working his way through a paperback he didn't really care about, but read anyway, because sitting still kept him from thinking too hard about the things he'd rather forget. He closed the book, not set it aside, closed it deliberately, marking his place with a receipt. Then he looked at the boy standing 3 feet away. 51 pounds, in a body that should have weighed 74. Gray hoodie with frayed cuffs and a gnawed hem. Worn 23 consecutive school days according to records that would later be entered as evidence. Sneakers too small, white sock visible through the split seam. Deep-set brown eyes that tracked Gideon's hands before Gideon had finished moving them. A learned behavior. The kind that develops when hands become weapons you need to see coming. Gideon didn't lean down, didn't make himself smaller or try to appear less threatening. He'd learned years ago that children in crisis don't need performance. They need truth. So he tilted sideways on the bench, dropping his eye level closer to the boys without theatrics, and moved his right boot off the bench beside him. Clearing space. Not saying, sit down, just making room available. "We do," Gideon said. His voice was quiet, gravelly from years of cigarettes he'd quit 5 years back, but still sounded like he smoked. "Tell me what's happening." The boy didn't sit. He stood there, backpack clutched against his chest with both arms wrapped around it, and for 5 full seconds didn't speak. Just looked at Gideon's face. The 3-inch scar along the left jaw from Fallujah, the reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, the anchor tattoos on the right forearm. The Hells Angels support tee visible under an open flannel shirt. "You look scary," Arlo whispered. Not an accusation, an observation. "I know. But Ms. Egan, the librarian, she said you come here every Tuesday. She said you read books about submarines and spies and you never bother anybody." "That's accurate. She said your name is Mr. Walsh, but everybody calls you Ironside." Gideon nodded once. Arlo's grip on the backpack tightened. "I live with a man named Douglas. He keeps the kitchen locked. I haven't eaten since yesterday at school." 17 words. Surface admission. The kind of truth a child offers when testing whether an adult can handle deeper ones. Gideon's expression didn't change. He'd spent 9 years as sergeant-at-arms for the Hells Angels Indiana chapter. He'd heard confessions that would break most people. But his jaw tightened slightly, a muscle flexing near that Fallujah scar. "How long has the kitchen been locked?" "Since October. He says I steal food. But I don't steal, I just get so hungry at night I can't sleep, and I thought maybe if I just had crackers or something." Arlo's voice cracked. "That's not stealing. That's survival." Gideon set the book on the bench beside him, giving Arlo his full attention. "What else does Douglas do?" Stage 2. Deeper truth. "He uses his belt on Fridays." The words came faster now, like water through a cracked dam. "I have to be quiet after 8 o'clock or he gets the belt. My ribs still hurt from 6 weeks ago. I tried to tell my teacher, Mrs. Haney, that my tummy hurts every night, but she wrote something down, and Douglas said it was just grief, and then nothing happened. I tried to show my bruises to the nurse, Miss Pittman, but Douglas said I fell on a trampoline, and she believed him. I gave Ms. Egan a note 4 days ago that said, 'I don't want to go home.' And she called the emergency number, and it goes to Douglas's phone, and he came and got me and locked me in my room for 2 days. 29 words, then 43 more, then silence. Gideon's hands were steady on his knees, but inside, something cold and focused was taking shape. The combat mindset he'd thought he'd left behind in 2001, the one that separated emotion from action and let him do what needed doing without hesitation. "Where's your room?" "It's the utility room, off the kitchen. There's no window. It's 9 feet by 7 feet. I measured it by walking because Douglas says I can't have a tape measure. I sleep on a foam pad with a sleeping bag. There's a 40-watt bulb. He locks the door from the outside with a deadbolt after 8 p.m. Gideon's voice dropped even quieter. "How old are you, son?" 8. I'm 8 years old. "And before Douglas, where were your parents?" Arlo's eyes filled, but he didn't look away. "They died, car accident on Route 37, 11 months ago. I was the only one who survived. They put me with Douglas 16 days after the accident because he's a licensed foster care coordinator, and he sits on the county placement review board, and he volunteers at the hospital, and leads Scout Troop 117, and everybody said I was lucky because Douglas is a good man who helps kids." The way Arlo said, "good man," like he was quoting something he'd heard over and over until the words lost meaning. "But he's not good," Arlo whispered. "He hurts me. And 3 weeks ago I heard him talking to someone in the kitchen. I was in the utility room with my ear against the door, and I heard him say my name, and then he said $263,400. He said I'd be like the last one. He said the last one was in 2019, and nobody looked twice." Stage 3. The bombshell. Gideon went completely still. Not frozen, the stillness of a man processing information and running calculations. $263,400. Previous victim. 2019. Nobody looked twice. He'd spent 6 years working as a paralegal after earning his certificate at Pendleton Correctional. He knew what those numbers meant. Wrongful death settlement, minor's trust, financial custodianship. And he knew what the last one implied. This wasn't abuse. This was a business model. Gideon took out his phone, never breaking eye contact. Arlo, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You're not going back there tonight. Not tomorrow. I'm going to make some calls right now, and by morning, Douglas Mercer is going to have a problem he has never had before. He pulled off his flannel shirt, just a plain button-up underneath, and draped it over Arlo's shoulders. Not ceremoniously. Matter of fact. The way you'd hand someone an umbrella in the rain. The flannel was warm from his body heat. Arlo pulled it tighter around himself. Then Gideon noticed it. When Arlo's hoodie sleeve pulled back as he adjusted the flannel, a plastic hospital bracelet was visible on his left wrist. Faded, but readable. Granton Regional Medical. Dated 2 days after his parents' accident. Still on his wrist 11 months later. Gideon read the date, read the name, and something in his chest tightened. This child had been wearing a piece of the worst day of his life for almost a year because it was the last thing connecting him to his parents. He made the first call. 1 ring, 2. Yeah. The voice on the other end was rough, alert. War Chief, it's Ironside. I'm at the Granton Library. I need you to hear something, and then I need you to make a call I can't make. Forrest War Chief Drummond, age 61, chapter president, had worked CPS intake for 6 years before quitting in disgust, after watching the same kids cycle through the same broken homes, while caseworkers drowned in paperwork and politicians gave speeches about protecting children but never funded the programs that actually would. He'd joined the Hells Angels at 52, late by club standards, because he'd decided that if the system wouldn't protect kids, he'd find people who would. Talk to me. Gideon put the phone on speaker, looked at Arlo. Tell him what you told me. The kitchen, the utility room, what you heard 3 weeks ago. Arlo's voice shook, but he spoke. Every word. The padlocked pantry, the deadbolt on his door, the belt on Fridays. The 4 failed help attempts. The overheard conversation about $263,400, and the last one in 2019. Silence on the other end. Then, Douglas Mercer, 2214 Birchwood Commons Drive. I know exactly who that is. Licensed coordinator, sits on the review board, neighborhood watch captain. I processed 3 of his placements when I was still at CPS. Never liked him. Something about the way he smiled when he talked about helping troubled kids. A pause. Ironside, if what this boy is saying is true, we're not talking about abuse. We're talking about financial predation with a body count. I know. How confident are you? Gideon looked at Arlo, at the 2 small shoes, the split lip healing for the 2nd time, the hospital bracelet from a day that had destroyed this child's world, worn like a talisman because no one had cared enough to help him move forward. Confident enough to stake my patch on it. Then we move. I'm calling Copperhead first. He'll know which CPS supervisors still have spines. Then I'm calling every brother within 50 miles. How long can you keep the kids safe where you are? Library closes at 6. That's 97 minutes. We'll be there in 40. The line went dead. Gideon turned to Arlo. What's about to happen is going to look overwhelming. A lot of motorcycles. A lot of men in leather vests. It's going to be loud, and then it's going to be very quiet. And those men are going to be the safest people you've ever met. Do you understand? Arlo nodded, but his eyes were huge. They won't hurt you. They won't hurt anybody unless somebody tries to take you. And if that happens, Gideon's voice was flat, certain. Nobody will take you. I promise you that. At 4:47 p.m., the librarian, Ruth Egan, 58, who'd worked at Granton Public Library for 23 years and knew most of the regulars by name, approached the vestibule. She'd watched Gideon hand his shirt to the small boy. She'd seen the phone call. Now she saw the boy wearing an adult's flannel like a blanket, and Gideon sitting with the focused stillness of a man preparing for something significant. "Mr. Walsh, is everything all right?" Gideon stood, 6'2", 227 pounds, knuckles that had been broken and reset multiple times, a scar bisecting his jaw, reading glasses still pushed up on his forehead. He looked at Ruth Egan and made a decision. "Ms. Egan, I need to be very direct with you. This child, Arlo Whitfield, is in immediate danger. His foster guardian is a man named Douglas Mercer. You know him. He sits on the county placement board. Volunteers at the hospital. Runs Scout Troop 117. You probably think he's a good man." Ruth nodded slowly. "I know Douglas. He's been in here several times to pick up Arlo. Always polite. Always concerned about Arlo's adjustment. I called him 4 days ago because Arlo seemed distressed." "And what happened when Douglas came to pick him up?" "He thanked me for calling. He said Arlo was struggling with grief and sometimes wrote dramatic notes. He said they were working with a counselor." "Arlo hasn't seen a counselor. What he has seen is a padlocked kitchen, a utility room he's locked in every night, and the inside of Douglas Mercer's belt. What he's heard is a conversation about $263,400 and how he'll be like the last one from 2019. And what I need from you is very simple. In about 30 minutes, a significant number of motorcycles are going to arrive at this library. They're not here to cause trouble. They're here to make sure Arlo doesn't go back to that house. Can you handle that?" Ruth Egan's face drained of color. "Oh my God. I called him. I called Douglas when Arlo gave me that note. I thought I was doing the right thing." "You were doing what you'd been trained to do. Call the emergency contact. The system failed you. It failed Arlo. But right now we have a chance to make sure it doesn't fail him again. Can you handle the motorcycles?" She straightened. "I can handle anything that keeps that child safe." "Good. Because what's about to happen isn't pretty, and it isn't quiet. But it's necessary." At 4:52 p.m., War Chief's second call connected. "Copperhead, it's War Chief. Code Fallen Youth. Granton Public Library, 847 Elm Commons Road. Child victim, age 8, foster care fraud, possible murder pattern. Ironside has the kid secured. I need you to call every name on the emergency roster, every brother within 50 miles, and I need you to make contact with Sherry Markham at CPS. She's the only supervisor I trust. Tell her to meet us at the library. Tell her to bring her case files on Douglas Mercer going back 5 years. And tell her if she buries this, I will personally ensure her name ends up in every newspaper in the state." "Understood. How many brothers?" "All of them. Every single one we can get moving in the next 30 minutes. At 4:58 p.m., the first message went out to the Hells Angels Indiana chapter encrypted group chat. Code Fallen Youth. Child Rescue. Granton Library. Urgent. If you can ride, ride now. At 5:03 p.m., the second wave of messages reached the 2 support chapters. Main chapter called Fallen Youth, Child in Danger, Granton, Indiana, Rally Point, Public Library, 50-mile response radius, move now. The response was immediate. Engines fired up in garages across 3 counties. Men kissed wives and girlfriends, grabbed vests, checked fuel tanks. Some were at work. They clocked out early, told bosses there was an emergency. Some were home with families. They explained briefly, promised to be safe, walked out the door. Some were already on the road. They rerouted mid-journey. Every brother within 50 miles who could move, moved. Copperhead. Real name Michael Torres, 58. Former Indiana State Police detective who'd walked away after 22 years when he realized the department cared more about clearance rates than actual justice, made the second most important call of the night. "Sherry, it's Mike Torres. Don't hang up. I'm calling about Douglas Mercer." Silence. Then, "Mike, I'm not supposed to discuss active cases with—" "Sherry, how many placement files does Mercer have under his name right now?" Longer silence. "That's confidential?" "Let me ask you a different question. When was the last time anyone from your office did a surprise home inspection on 2214 Birchwood Commons Drive?" "We don't have the staff for surprise." "That's what I thought." "Third question. Do you remember Tyler Bowman?" He heard her sharp intake of breath. "Tyler died in 2021. Hypothermia. Tragic accident. The medical examiner ruled it hypothermia after a 9-year-old boy wandered from his foster home in February wearing only underwear, was found 200 yards from the back door, and died overnight. That foster home was Douglas Mercer's. That boy had been withdrawn from school activities 3 months before he died. The ME noted he was underweight, but classified it as pre-existing. And Douglas Mercer collected $318,700 from Tyler's deceased father's workplace accident settlement. Sherry's voice dropped. "Mike, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I have an 8-year-old boy sitting in Granton Public Library right now who weighs 51 pounds, who lives in a locked utility room, whose kitchen is padlocked, who heard Douglas Mercer tell someone 3 weeks ago that he'd be like the last one, and that nobody looked twice at the 2019 case. I'm saying Douglas Mercer has been named financial custodian of a $263,400 wrongful death settlement from this child's parents' accident. I'm saying you need to pull every file you have on Mercer's placements going back to 2015 and meet me at that library in the next 40 minutes. And I'm saying if you don't, I will call every media outlet in Indiana and tell them CPS had the pattern in front of them and chose not to look." Long pause. "I'll be there. And Mike, if you're wrong about this—" "I'm not wrong. I was a detective for 22 years. I know what a murder pattern looks like." At 5:11 p.m., Gideon bought Arlo a granola bar and a bottle of water from the vending machine near the restrooms. Arlo tore into the granola bar like he hadn't eaten in days. Because he hadn't, not really. School lunch yesterday. Nothing since. "Slow down," Gideon said gently. "Your stomach's not used to food right now. Small bites. I'll get you a real meal soon, but for now, small bites." Arlo slowed down, eyes never leaving Gideon's face. "Are you really going to help me? Or are you going to call Douglas like everyone else?" "I've never called Douglas. I never will. And in about 20 minutes, you're going to see exactly what help looks like." "Will it hurt him? Douglas?" Gideon considered how to answer that. "Not the way you're thinking. We don't hurt people. That's not what we do. But we're going to make sure he can never hurt you or any other child again. And yes, that will hurt him, just not with fists, with truth, with evidence, with witnesses, with the system he's been gaming for years finally looking at what he's actually been doing." At 5:19 p.m., the rumble started. Low, distant, like thunder rolling in across frozen fields. Arlo's head lifted. "What's that?" Gideon smiled, a rare expression on a face that didn't smile often. "That's 97 reasons Douglas Mercer's life just got very complicated." The rumble grew. Not one engine, not 5, dozens. The sound of motorcycles moving in formation, synchronized, deliberate. It rattled the library windows. It echoed off the brick facade of the building across the street. It was the sound of brotherhood mobilizing. Arlo walked to the window, Gideon's flannel still wrapped around his shoulders, and looked out at the parking lot. His mouth fell open. Motorcycles. Rows of them. Chrome and black leather and American steel, pulling into the lot in disciplined formation. 10 bikes. 20. 30. They kept coming, filling the main lot, overflowing into the street, lining up with military precision. Riders dismounted, vests bearing the Hells Angels patch. Men aged 34 to 73, different builds, different backgrounds, but moving with the same coordinated efficiency that came from years of riding together. Not chaos, not a mob. A controlled, deliberate presence. "How many?" Arlo whispered. 97. That's so many. That's how many people care whether you're safe tonight." The engines cut off almost in unison, first the lead bikes, then row by row, until the last Harley rumbled into silence. The sudden quiet after all that noise felt heavy, expectant, like the moment before lightning strikes. 97 men stood in that parking lot, not moving, not shouting, simply present. The oldest was 73, Brimstone, chapter founder, a man who'd shaken hands with every judge in Hardin County at one point or another during his 40 years in Indiana. The youngest was 34, Rimshot, former IT contractor who'd joined the club 3 years back after his niece had been failed by foster care in Illinois, and he'd decided he'd rather ride with men who actually protected kids than sit in an office pretending the world worked the way it was supposed to. Between them, combat veterans and former teachers, ex-cops and former counselors, mechanics and paralegics who'd earned certificates behind bars and welders who volunteered at youth centers, men with records and men who'd never broken a law. All wearing the same patch, all there for the same reason. Now you might be thinking, 97 Hells Angels descending on a small-town library. This is where things turn violent, where fists start flying and property gets damaged and chaos takes over. That's what the evening news would show, right? That's the story people expect when they hear biker gang. But that's not what happened. Because the Hells Angels had learned something over decades of protecting children. Violence is what people use when they don't have leverage. When you have 97 witnesses, when you have evidence, when you have community pressure and legal knowledge and the patience to let the system do its job once you force it to pay attention, you don't need violence. You need presence. War Chief was the first through the library door. 61 years old, gray beard down to his chest, wearing a vest with patches from chapters across the Midwest. He walked like a man who'd spent 6 years navigating bureaucratic nightmares and had zero patience for anyone who'd waste his time with bullshit. Behind him, Copperhead, the ex-detective with law enforcement contacts in 3 counties, Gravel, 67, combat medic from Vietnam, who'd seen more injuries than most ER doctors. Dustcloud, 49, former middle school counselor who knew how to talk to traumatized kids without making them feel interrogated. And Rimshot, laptop bag over his shoulder, phone already out and recording timestamps. Ruth Egan stood behind the circulation desk, hands gripping the counter. She'd agreed to let this happen, but agreeing and watching it unfold were different things. War Chief approached the desk. "Ms. Egan, thank you for keeping this child safe. Where's Ironside?" She pointed toward the vestibule. "Back there, with Arlo." War Chief nodded once and walked past. The other brothers followed, boots heavy on worn carpet, filing into the children's section with the quiet efficiency of men who'd trained for this exact scenario a dozen times. Gideon stood when War Chief approached. Arlo was still sitting on the bench, wrapped in the flannel that was 3 sizes too big, granola bar wrapper clutched in one hand. "War Chief, this is Arlo Whitfield. Arlo, this is Forrest Drummond. We call him War Chief. He used to work for Child Protective Services before he got tired of watching the system fail kids like you. War Chief crouched. Not easy for a 61-year-old with bad knees, but he did it anyway, getting down to Arlo's eye level. Arlo, I need to ask you some questions. They're going to be hard questions, and some of them might make you feel scared or upset, but I need you to answer them as honestly as you can, because honest answers are what's going to keep you safe. Can you do that? Arlo looked at Gideon. Gideon nodded. Okay, Arlo whispered. Good. First question. Where exactly is your room in Douglas Mercer's house? The utility room. Off the kitchen. You go through the kitchen and there's a door on the left side. He keeps it locked with a deadbolt from the outside. War Chief pulled out his phone, opened a notes app, started typing. What's in that room? A foam pad, a sleeping bag, one light bulb, concrete floor, no window. There's a water heater in the corner that makes noise at night. Where do you keep your clothes? In my backpack. I only have 2 shirts and 1 pair of pants and these shoes and socks. Where do you eat? At school I eat lunch. At home? Sometimes Douglas gives me dinner. Sometimes he doesn't. It depends. On what? On if I was good that day, if I made noise or asked for things, or if he's in a bad mood. War Chief's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. The kitchen. You said it's locked. Describe that for me. There's a padlock on the pantry door, a big one. Douglas has the key on his keychain and he keeps it with him always. Even when he's sleeping, I think he keeps it with him. When's the last time you ate a full meal? School lunch yesterday. Taco Tuesday. I got 2 tacos because my friend didn't want his. And before that? School lunch Monday. And Friday. I don't eat on weekends, usually, unless Douglas remembers to feed me. War Chief looked at Gideon, a look that said everything without words. Then back to Arlo. Last question for now, and this one's important. You told Ironside you heard Douglas talking to someone 3 weeks ago. I need you to tell me everything you remember about that conversation. Arlo took a breath. Then, in the flat, practiced cadence of a child who'd repeated something to himself so many times, it had become a script. Douglas said, Craig, I need you to understand. This is almost done. The other man, Craig, said, What does almost done mean, Douglas? Douglas said, It means the kid's down to 51 pounds, in January, without a coat. Craig said, You're saying it happens by itself. Douglas said, I'm saying $263,400 doesn't care how it happens, just that it does. Craig said, And the last one? Nobody came back on that. Douglas said, The last one was 2019. Different county, different name on the trust. Nobody looked twice. The room went completely silent. War Chief stopped typing, looked at Arlo for a long 5 seconds. You remember all of that word for word? I repeated it to myself every night so I wouldn't forget. I don't read or write good, but I remember voices exactly. War Chief stood slowly, turned to Copperhead. That's a confession? Premeditated? Financial motive? Reference to previous victim? We need to find Craig. Copperhead was already on his phone. I'll pull Mercer's known associates. If Craig's a relative, that narrows it fast. License plate database, property records, business filings. At 5:34 p.m., Sherry Markham arrived. Late 40s, carrying a messenger bag that looked heavy, face drawn and exhausted. She'd been a CPS supervisor for 11 years. She'd seen terrible things. But walking into a library to find 97 Hell's Angels standing between her and a child she was supposed to have protected was a new kind of terrible. War Chief met her at the door. You brought the files? I brought everything I could pull in 40 minutes. She set the bag on a table. Mercer's current placements, past placements going back 7 years, financial documentation, home inspection reports, incident logs. Mike, if you're wrong about this, open the Tyler Bowman file. She pulled out a manila folder, set it on the table. Copperhead, dust cloud, gravel, and rim shot gathered around. Sherry opened it. Tyler Bowman, age 9, placed with Douglas Mercer, August 2019. Died March 2021. Official cause, hypothermia after wandering from home during a winter night. What else? War Chief's voice was hard. She flipped pages. Medical examiner noted subject was underweight at time of death. 47 pounds. Significant below age-appropriate weight. Examiner classified it as pre-existing condition related to trauma history prior to foster placement. Keep going. Tyler was found 200 yards from the back door, in his underwear. No coat. In February, Mercer reported him missing at 6:47 a.m. Responding officers noted Mercer appeared distressed and cooperative. What about the investigation? Closed within 2 weeks. No indication of foul play. Classified as tragic accident. Mercer received victim services support and was cleared to continue foster placements after a 90-day review period. Copperhead leaned forward. What was the financial settlement associated with Tyler Bowman? Sherry hesitated. That's not typically in the CPS file, but you pulled it anyway because I told you to look for financial patterns. She pulled out a second sheet. Tyler's biological father died in a workplace accident. Industrial equipment malfunction. Wrongful death settlement. $318,700. Mercer was named temporary financial custodian 27 days after placement. Upon Tyler's death, trust dissolved and funds distributed to guardian estate per custodianship documentation. The table went quiet. War Chief spoke slowly, deliberately. So Tyler Bowman enters Mercer's home, August 2019. Settlement finalized September 2019. By December 2020, Tyler's been withdrawn from school activities. March 2021, Tyler dies of hypothermia after wandering from the house in February. 19 months from placement to death. And Mercer walks away with $318,700. I didn't make those connections at the time. Sherry's voice cracked. Nobody did. That's the point. Mercer was careful. Different county for the death. Different caseworkers. Different judge for the custodianship. He spread it out so no single person saw the whole pattern. War Chief looked at Arlo, still sitting on the bench 20 feet away. Now he's doing it again. Arlo's parents died 11 months ago. Mercer got custodianship of $263,400 within 19 days. And 3 weeks ago, Arlo heard Mercer say he'd be like the last one. Sherry sat down hard. Oh my God. Yeah. At 5:47 p.m., they began collecting witness statements. Louise Tanner, 68, lived 3 houses down from Mercer's property on Birchwood Commons Drive. She arrived at the library after Rimshot had tracked her down via public records and called her. She walked in holding her purse tight against her chest, nervous around the bikers, but Dust Cloud met her at the door with a kind face and a gentle voice, and within 2 minutes she was sitting at a table telling her story. I called the non-emergency line 6 weeks ago, Louise said, hands shaking slightly as she spoke. November 14th. It was 37 degrees outside, and I saw Arlo in Douglas's front yard. No coat, just a hoodie. He was standing there like he was waiting for something, but there was no car in the driveway. He looked so cold. So I called the police and said I was concerned about a child being left outside in the cold. What happened? Dust Cloud asked, voice even, non-judgmental. An officer came out. I saw him talk to Douglas in the doorway. They talked for maybe 5 minutes. The officer left. Nothing changed. Did the officer speak with Arlo? No. Just Douglas. Do you know why nothing changed? Louise's voice dropped to almost a whisper. The officer knows Douglas. They're in neighborhood watch together. Douglas runs the meetings. The officer told me later, off the record, that Douglas explained Arlo had just run outside for a minute, and he'd been about to call him back in. The officer said Douglas was a good guy, very involved in the community, and I shouldn't worry. But you did worry. I worried every single day after that. I saw Arlo come and go in the same clothes over and over. I saw him leave for school without breakfast. Douglas would put him on the bus, and I never once saw that child eating anything in the morning. But I didn't call again because I thought if the police already knew and weren't doing anything, then maybe I was just being paranoid. Dust Cloud reached across the table, didn't touch her, just let his hand rest on the surface between them. Louise, you weren't paranoid. You were right. And calling that first time mattered. It's going to be part of the record now. It's proof that people tried to help and the system dismissed them. Tears ran down Louise's face. I should have done more. You did what you could. And you're here now, telling the truth. That's what matters. Frank Greer, 71, arrived 20 minutes later. Arlo's father's longtime co-worker and family friend. He'd been trying to reach Arlo for 8 months. I knew Ben, Arlo's father, for 23 years, Frank said, voice rough with age and grief. Worked side by side at the Whirlpool supplier plant until it closed. When Ben and Sarah died, I tried to stay in touch with Arlo. I called the foster care office. They gave me Douglas Mercer's name. I called him 4 times in the first 3 months. He was always polite. Always said Arlo was adjusting, that too many visitors would confuse him, that the counselor recommended limited outside contact during the transition period. He said he'd have Arlo call me when he was ready. Did Arlo ever call? No. So I tried calling Douglas again in September, October, November. He stopped answering. I left voicemails, sent letters to the address. Nothing. I finally called CPS in December and said I was concerned I couldn't reach Arlo. They told me to give it time, that foster children need space to bond with their new families. Did you try to visit in person? Once, January 3rd. I drove to the house. Douglas answered the door. He was very friendly, very apologetic. Said Arlo was at a friend's house for a play date. Offered to have Arlo call me later that week. Never happened. Did you see Arlo at all during that visit? Frank's voice broke. No, but I saw the inside of the house through the doorway. The kitchen. I saw a padlock on one of the interior doors. I remember thinking that was strange. Who puts a padlock inside their own house? Rimshot, who'd been recording the entire conversation on his phone, looked up. Mr. Greer, would you be willing to testify to this if it goes to court? I'd testify to anything that helps that boy. Sandra Kupchak, 54, had volunteered at the food bank alongside Douglas Mercer for 3 years. She arrived at 6:08 p.m., just before the library was supposed to close. Ruth Egan had agreed to keep the building open as long as necessary. Sandra sat down across from War Chief and Copperhead. I don't know if what I have to say matters, but Mike Torres said you needed to hear about Douglas's behavior after Tyler Bowman died. Tell us. Tyler died in March 2021. I didn't know Tyler. I only met him once or twice when Douglas brought him to food bank events. But after Tyler died, Douglas took 2 weeks off from volunteering. When he came back, he was different, quieter. He didn't talk about Tyler much, but when he did, he'd say things like, I did everything I could, and some children are too damaged to save. It felt wrong, like he was defending himself against criticism that nobody was actually making. What else? In May 2021, 2 months after Tyler died, Douglas bought a new truck. He paid cash. He mentioned it casually, said he'd been saving up. But I remember thinking, how does a county foster coordinator afford a $35,000 truck in cash? And then in August, he took a 2-week vacation to Colorado. Posted photos on Facebook, nice hotels, expensive restaurants. I thought it was odd that someone would go on a luxury vacation so soon after losing a foster child, but I didn't say anything. Copperhead's fingers flew across his phone screen. I'm pulling financial records. If Mercer made large purchases shortly after Tyler's death, that establishes spending pattern linked to the settlement payout. Sandra continued. Then in February 2022, almost a year after Tyler died, Douglas took another placement. Arlo. And I watched him do the same things he'd done with Tyler. Brought Arlo to one food bank event, took photos, posted them online with captions about giving back and helping children heal. After that first event, I never saw Arlo again. I asked Douglas once how Arlo was adjusting. He said, much better now that he's accepted the structure and routine. The way he said structure, it made my skin crawl, but I didn't know what it meant, not until now. At 6:23 p.m., Copperhead found Craig. Craig Mercer, brother-in-law, age 44, lives in Richmond, Indiana, 48 miles from here. One previous arrest, DUI, 2018, charges reduced to reckless driving. Owns a contracting business. Property records show Douglas paid him $11,800 in 2 cash installments last year for a bathroom renovation. War Chief looked at the assembled brothers. Gravel, dust cloud, you're with me. We're going to Richmond, tonight. I want to talk to Craig Mercer before Douglas has a chance to call him. At 6:31 p.m., they discovered the browser history. Rimshot had asked Arlo a simple question. Does Douglas have a computer at home? Yes. A laptop. In his bedroom. Does he use it a lot? Sometimes I hear him typing at night. Rimshot looked at Copperhead. If we can get a warrant, we need probable cause for a warrant. We need CPS or police to petition. Sherry Markham interrupted. I can authorize an emergency inspection, right now, based on multiple credible reports of child endangerment and financial irregularities. That gets us into the house legally, if we see the laptop in plain view during the inspection. Copperhead smiled. Then it's not a search, it's an observation during a welfare check. At 6:44 p.m., the convoy rolled out. Not all 97 bikes. That would have been overkill for a welfare check. But 23 motorcycles, enough to establish presence without triggering a legal challenge of intimidation, accompanied Sherry Markham's CPS vehicle and 2 Granton police cruisers to 2214 Birchwood Commons Drive. The remaining 74 brothers stayed at the library, surrounding it, protecting it, making damn sure that if Douglas Mercer somehow got word of what was happening and tried to come for Arlo, he'd have to go through them first. Gideon stayed with Arlo. So did Gravel, the combat medic, who'd done a quick physical assessment and determined Arlo needed proper medical attention as soon as possible. You're not going anywhere near that house, Gideon told Arlo. You understand? No matter what happens, you're staying here with me and these brothers, and Douglas Mercer doesn't get within 100 yards of you. Arlo nodded, but his eyes were scared. What if the police believe him again? What if they say it's okay and I have to go back? That's not going to happen, because this time Douglas isn't dealing with one teacher or one caseworker or one neighbor. He's dealing with 97 witnesses, 3 CPS files, recorded testimony from 4 people, and my promise that he will never touch you again. At 6:52 p.m., Douglas Mercer was cooking dinner. Pan-seared chicken breast, roasted vegetables, a side salad, humming along to a classic rock station playing through a Bluetooth speaker on the kitchen counter. Wearing reading glasses, a Patagonia fleece over a polo shirt, khakis with a careful crease. He looked like a man having an ordinary Tuesday evening. The same hands that held the spatula had grabbed Arlo hard enough to leave fingerprint bruises. The same kitchen where he carefully plated his dinner had a padlock keeping an 8-year-old from eating. The same man who hummed along to Fleetwood Mac had researched hypothermia staging and stood to gain $263,400 from a child's death. Evil wears ordinary faces. Monsters look like neighbors. When the knock came at his front door at 6:58 p.m., Douglas set down the spatula, wiped his hands on a dish towel, and walked calmly to answer it. He opened the door, expecting a neighbor or a delivery. Instead, he found 2 Granton police officers, Sherry Markham holding an official CPS document, and behind them, 23 motorcycles lined up along his street. His expression didn't change much. Slight surprise, mild confusion. "Officers? Sherry? What's going on?" "Mr. Mercer, I'm here to conduct an emergency welfare inspection of this property based on multiple credible reports of child endangerment involving your foster placement, Arlo Whitfield." Sherry held up the authorization form. "This inspection is being conducted pursuant to Indiana Code 3134 2.5. You are required to allow immediate access." Douglas smiled, the same warm, measured smile he'd used on caseworkers, principals, nurses, police officers. "Of course, I have nothing to hide, though I'm confused about what reports you're referring to. Arlo is doing wonderfully. He's at the library right now, actually. He likes to read after school." "We know where Arlo is, Mr. Mercer." Something flickered across Douglas's face, just for a second. Then the smile returned. "Well then, let me help in any way I can. Please come in." They entered. Sherry first, then the 2 officers, then Copperhead and Rimshot, who'd been designated as community advocates, authorized to observe the inspection. The house was immaculate, hardwood floors gleaming, furniture tasteful but not ostentatious. Family photos on the walls, including several staged shots of Douglas and Arlo from the first 2 weeks after placement, the ones Douglas had taken specifically for moments like this. "As you can see," Douglas said, gesturing around, "this is a safe, clean, appropriate home for a child. I take my responsibilities as a foster parent very seriously." "Show me Arlo's room," Sherry said. "Of course, right this way." Douglas led them to a bedroom on the 2nd floor. Twin bed with a NASA-themed comforter, desk with school supplies, bookshelf with age-appropriate books, posters of planets on the walls, a perfect child's room. Except Arlo had never slept there. Not once. Sherry looked at the bed, made with hospital corners, comforter without a wrinkle. "When's the last time this bed was slept in?" "Last night, of course. Arlo makes his bed every morning. I've taught him responsibility, and this bed hasn't been slept in for weeks. The dust pattern on the nightstand is undisturbed. There's no wear on the carpet leading to the bed. This is a showroom." Douglas's smile faltered. "I don't appreciate the implication. Where does Arlo actually sleep?" "I told you in his—" "Where does Arlo actually sleep, Mr. Mercer?" Long pause. Douglas calculated. Then, "He's been having some behavioral issues. Nightmares, sleepwalking. For his own safety, I've been having him sleep in the utility room temporarily until we can get him assessed by—" "Show me the utility room." They went downstairs, through the kitchen, where Douglas's dinner was still cooling on the counter, to a door on the left side. A deadbolt mounted on the outside. Rimshot photographed it. The deadbolt, the kitchen, the padlock on the pantry door that Douglas had somehow forgotten to explain. Sherry pointed at the deadbolt. "You lock him in at night?" "For his safety." He's tried to leave the house in his sleep. Open the door. Douglas produced a key. Unlocked the deadbolt. Opened the door. The utility room was exactly as Arlo had described. 9 feet by 7 feet. Concrete floor. One 40-watt bulb, a foam pad with a sleeping bag, water heater in the corner. No window. The air was cold, colder than the rest of the house. Rimshot photographed everything. The dimensions, the lock, the bare bulb, the sleeping arrangement that no human being would consider adequate for a child. This is where an 8-year-old child has been sleeping for 11 months, Sherry said. Her voice was shaking. This is what you call appropriate care? This is temporary. I've been working with— Where's your laptop, Mr. Mercer? I don't see how that's relevant. Where is your laptop? Douglas's face tightened. The warm smile was gone. In my bedroom. Why? I need to see it. That's private property. You'd need a warrant. Copperhead stepped forward. Actually, if it's visible during an emergency welfare inspection, it's subject to plain view observation. And if that observation reveals evidence of criminal activity, it can be seized. Douglas looked at Copperhead for the first time. Really looked. Saw the age, the bearing, the way he stood. You're not CPS? Retired Indiana State Police, Detective Division, 22 years. I know what a crime scene looks like, Mr. Mercer. This is one. Douglas Mercer, age 46, licensed foster care coordinator, scout troop leader, food bank board member, hospital volunteer coordinator, neighborhood watch captain. The man who'd been called a pillar of the community, who'd been trusted with the most vulnerable children, who'd sat on the board that approved other foster families, stood in his kitchen with his dinner getting cold and his carefully constructed life beginning to collapse. And then he made a mistake. He ran. Not out the front door. 23 motorcycles and 2 police cruisers blocked that exit. He ran toward the back door, through the kitchen, shouldering past Sherry, sprinting for the deck and the yard beyond. The officers moved fast, but Copperhead moved faster. 22 years of chasing suspects had taught him exactly how to cut off a fleeing runner. He intercepted Douglas at the threshold, arm out, voice loud and commanding. "Stop right there!" Douglas tried to push past. Copperhead didn't hit him, didn't need to, just used his body weight and positioning to force Douglas backward into the arms of the 2 officers. Face scraped against the kitchen floor as they brought him down. Arms wrenched behind his back. Handcuffs clicked into place. You have the right to remain silent. They read him his rights right there on his own kitchen floor, next to the pantry with the padlock and the utility room door hanging open. At 7:14 p.m., Rimshot opened Douglas Mercer's laptop. No password protection. Douglas had been confident no one would ever see it. The browser history was there in plain sight. Search queries from the past 3 weeks. Hypothermia, indoor environment, January, Indiana. Child exposure threshold temperatures. How long survival without food water, 8-year-old. Accidental death investigation procedures. Trust distribution minor death before 18. Rimshot photographed every screen. Copperhead called his contacts at the prosecutor's office. The evidence was damning, systematic, premeditated. At 7:31 p.m., they found the documents. In a filing cabinet in Douglas's home office, the full trust paperwork. Arlo's wrongful death settlement, $263,400. Custodianship granted to Douglas Mercer 19 days after placement. Disbursement clause. Upon minor's death before age 18, trust dissolves and funds transfer to legal guardian estate. Beneath Arlo's file, Tyler Bowman's file. Same paperwork structure. Settlement: $318,700. Date of custodianship petition: 27 days after placement. Date of Tyler's death: 19 months later. And beneath Tyler's file, transaction records. Purchases Douglas had made in the months following Tyler's death. The truck, $35,100 cash. The bathroom renovation, $11,800 to Craig Mercer Contracting. The Cancun trip, $4,900. All paid from Douglas's accounts within 6 months of Tyler's death. Copperhead photographed it all. That's motive. That's pattern. That's enough for a grand jury. At 7:52 p.m., War Chief, Gravel, and Dust Cloud arrived at Craig Mercer's house in Richmond, Indiana. 3 motorcycles pulling into the driveway of a modest ranch-style home. Craig came to the door in a work shirt and jeans, confusion turning to fear when he saw the leather vests. "Craig Mercer? Who's asking?" "My name is Forrest Drummond. I'm here to talk to you about your brother-in-law, Douglas. And before you say you don't know anything, I want you to understand something very clearly. Douglas Mercer was arrested 40 minutes ago. Right now, investigators are going through his house, his computer, his financial records. They've already found evidence of fraud, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit murder. The question isn't whether Douglas is going down. He is. The only question is whether you're going down with him." Craig's face went pale. I didn't. 3 weeks ago, you had a conversation with Douglas in his kitchen. A conversation about a child weighing 51 pounds in January without a coat. A conversation about $263,400. A conversation where you said, "And the last one? Nobody came back on that." Do you remember that conversation, Craig? How do you? The child heard you. He was behind the utility room door. He heard every word, and he repeated it to us, word for word. War Chief stepped closer. "Now I can call the police right now and have you arrested as an accessory to attempted murder. Or you can invite us inside, tell us everything you know, and maybe, the prosecutor will consider cooperation as a mitigating factor. You have 5 seconds to decide." Craig Mercer broke in 3. "I'll tell you everything. Please. I didn't know he was actually going to. I thought he was just talking. I didn't think he'd really." Inside Craig's kitchen, with Gravel and Dust Cloud as witnesses, Craig confessed. He'd known about Tyler. He'd helped Douglas stage the scene. The back door left open, the timeline that didn't quite add up. He'd provided the witness statement about the trampoline accident when Arlo's school nurse had documented bruises. He'd taken payment for the bathroom renovation, $11,800 in cash that he'd known came from Tyler's settlement. I told myself it was just money, that Tyler had already died, that taking the money didn't hurt anyone. But when Douglas started talking about Arlo the same way, when he said, "This is almost done," and talked about 51 pounds and January, I knew what he meant, and I didn't stop him. I didn't stop him. Dust Cloud, who'd spent 15 years as a middle school counselor before joining the club, had seen a lot of cowards in his career. People who watched abuse happen and did nothing. People who profited from suffering and told themselves they weren't responsible. He'd learned to control his anger around them because anger didn't extract truth. "Craig, you're going to write down everything you just told us. Dates, conversations, payments, everything. And then you're going to come with us to the Granton Police Department, and you're going to give an official statement. Because right now, you're a witness who can put Douglas Mercer away for the rest of his life. But if you don't cooperate, you become an accomplice. Do you understand the difference? Yes. I'll cooperate. I'll tell them everything. At 8:17 p.m., Rimshot discovered something that changed everything. He was going through Douglas's laptop more thoroughly, beyond the browser history. Email folders, cloud storage, backup files, looking for anything that might strengthen the case. And then he found it. A folder titled Placement History, buried 3 directories deep. Inside, spreadsheets, names, dates, settlement amounts. Not just Tyler and Arlo, 6 names total. Rimshot's hands froze on the keyboard. Copperhead, you need to see this. They were still at Douglas's house. Douglas himself had been transported to the county jail 40 minutes earlier. The house was now a crime scene, officers and CPS investigators moving through every room. Copperhead looked over Rimshot's shoulder at the laptop screen. 6 children, 6 names, 6 placement dates, 6 financial settlements. Tyler Bowman, $318,700, died March 2021. Arlo Whitfield, $263,400. Current. Jessica Raines, $412,800. Died August 2018. Marcus Delacroix, $287,100. Died November 2017. Sophie Turner, $341,200. Transferred to another placement, February 2016. Brandon Kemp, $198,500. Transferred to another placement, May 2015. 4 deaths, 2 transfers, all with substantial settlements, all under Douglas Mercer's financial custodianship. Jesus Christ, Copperhead whispered. This isn't 2 victims, it's 6, and 4 of them are dead. He immediately called War Chief. Chief, we've got a problem. Douglas didn't just kill Tyler. We're looking at 4 deaths. 4. And 2 more kids who might have gotten out alive. We need to track down those transfers, Sophie Turner and Brandon Kemp. We need to verify their current status. War Chief's voice came through the phone, hard and focused. Call the FBI. Right now. This is beyond local jurisdiction. This is a serial financial predator operating across multiple counties. At 8:34 p.m., War Chief called Special Agent Lauren Voss, FBI Indianapolis Field Office, Crimes Against Children Division. They'd worked together once before, 2019, a trafficking case that had required cooperation between law enforcement and the Hells Angels street-level intelligence network. War Chief had earned her respect then by handing over evidence without ego, without trying to play hero. He'd simply wanted the kids safe and the predators in prison. Agent Voss, it's Forrest Drummond. War Chief, it's been a while. What do you have? He told her. All of it. Douglas Mercer, the 6 names, the 4 deaths, the settlements, the laptop, the browser history, Craig's confession. We're bringing Arlo Whitfield to the hospital now for medical evaluation. We have 3 witness testimonies documented. We have physical evidence from the house, the locked room, the padlocked pantry, photographs of everything. We have Douglas's own computer showing premeditation. And we have a pattern going back to 2015. Agent Voss, I need the Bureau on this because Douglas operated across county lines specifically to avoid detection. This is organized. This is systematic. And we don't know how many other victims there might be. Silence on the other end. Then, where's Douglas Mercer now? Hardin County Jail. Booked at 7:38 p.m. Current charges: child endangerment, unlawful restraint, fraud. But those charges are about to get upgraded once you see what we've found. I'll be there in 90 minutes. Don't let anyone touch that laptop. Don't let anyone talk to Mercer until I arrive. And War Chief, thank you for calling us. I know that wasn't easy. Easy doesn't factor in. Not when 4 kids are dead. At 8:52 p.m., they regrouped at the Hells Angels clubhouse. The library had closed. Arlo had been taken to Granton Regional Medical for examination. Gravel went with him, along with a pediatric specialist who'd been called in by CPS. The medical findings would be part of the case: acute malnutrition, 2 healing rib fractures untreated, developing frostbite on left toes, dehydration, signs of prolonged psychological trauma. The clubhouse was industrial, practical. A large open room with a bar at one end, tables throughout, chapter banners on the walls, American flags and motorcycle parts, and photos of brothers who'd passed. 97 men filled that space now. Standing room only. War Chief stood near the center. Rimshot had set up a laptop connected to a projector, displaying the evidence on the wall. "Brothers, what we found tonight is worse than we thought." War Chief's voice carried across the room. "Douglas Mercer didn't just victimize Arlo Whitfield and Tyler Bowman. We've identified 6 children in his custody over the past decade. 4 of them are dead. 2 were transferred to other placements before he could finish what he started." The room was silent. 97 men who'd seen violence, who'd lived hard lives, who weren't shocked easily. All of them stunned. War Chief continued. "Jessica Raines, age 7, died August 2018. Official cause, drowning in the bathtub. Ruled accidental. Settlement, $412,800. Marcus Delacroix, age 6, died November 2017. Official cause, fall down basement stairs. Ruled accidental. Settlement, $287,100. Tyler Bowman, age 9, died March 2021. Official cause, hypothermia. Ruled accidental. Settlement, $318,700. Each death occurred between 14 and 22 months after placement. Each time, Douglas was named financial custodian within 30 days of taking custody. Each time, the trust dissolved upon the child's death and the funds transferred to his estate. Copperhead stepped forward. The 2 survivors, Sophie Turner and Brandon Kemp, both had relatives who fought for custody. Sophie's aunt filed emergency guardianship papers after 7 months. Brandon's grandmother hired a lawyer and got him out after 9 months. They both survived because someone with resources and determination pulled them out before Douglas could escalate. "That's the pattern," War Chief said. "Douglas targets children with settlements, but no family support. No one to fight for them. No one to check on them. He gets custodianship fast. Too fast, approved by judges who know him socially. He isolates the children, controls all communication, intercepts all oversight. Then he starves them, harms them, kills them slowly in ways that can be explained as accidents, and he walks away with hundreds of thousands of dollars each time." Brimstone, the 73-year-old founder, spoke from the back of the room. "How many caseworkers saw these kids?" "At least 14 different caseworkers across 4 counties over 10 years, Copperhead answered. None of them connected the dots because Douglas made sure no single caseworker saw more than 1 case. He moved between counties, changed legal representation, used his position on the Placement Review Board to influence his own oversight. "This is a system failure," War Chief said. "Not one person failing. Not one missed sign. An entire structure built to protect children that actually enabled a predator because he understood exactly how to manipulate it. The room erupted. Angry voices, fists hitting tables. War Chief held up his hand. "We don't rage. We work. The FBI is involved now. Agent Voss will be here in 40 minutes. She's going to need everything we've documented, every photograph, every testimony, every piece of evidence. We hand it over clean, organized, airtight. We let the system do its job now that we've forced it to pay attention." At 9:08 p.m., they realized they'd found Douglas's partner. Not Craig, he was just an accomplice who'd helped cover specific incidents. But someone else had been involved in the placement process itself. Rimshot, still going through the laptop, found email correspondence between Douglas and someone named G. Henson at hardencps.org. Grant Henson, a CPS supervisor who'd processed 3 of Douglas's placement petitions, who'd signed off on emergency expedited custodianships, who'd closed investigation reports that should have remained open. The emails were careful, professional. But between the lines, a pattern emerged. Henson would alert Douglas when a high-value case was coming through intake. Douglas would petition for placement immediately. Henson would approve it with minimal review. After each child's death, Henson would close the investigation quickly and issue statements praising Douglas's dedication despite the tragic outcome. In return, Douglas had made 4 payments to Henson Consulting LLC over the past 6 years, payments ranging from $8,900 to $15,200, all shortly after settlement funds had been transferred to Douglas's estate. "That's the network," Copperhead said. "Douglas found the victims and executed the plan. Henson provided the institutional access and cover. Craig provided the physical help when needed. 3 people. Quiet. Professional. Operating within the system." At 9:23 p.m., Agent Lauren Voss arrived at the clubhouse with 2 other FBI agents. She was mid-40s, wearing a practical jacket and tactical boots, carrying a bag full of evidence collection equipment. She walked into a room full of 97 Hells Angels without flinching. War Chief met her at the entrance. "Agent Voss, thank you for coming." "Thank you for calling us." She looked around the room. "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. How long has your organization known about Douglas Mercer?" "We found out about him 4 hours and 52 minutes ago when his victim asked one of our brothers for help. Everything you're about to see was gathered tonight." She studied his face. "You're telling me you uncovered a decade-long serial financial murder operation in under 5 hours? We had motivation that official channels didn't. The child was in our custody, trusting us, and we weren't going to let bureaucracy slow us down." "That's not exactly protocol." "No, ma'am. But protocol had failed 4 children and was about to fail a 5th. We did what needed doing." Long pause. Then Agent Voss set her bag on a table. "Show me everything." They did. Rimshot presented the laptop evidence, the spreadsheet, the browser history, the emails with Henson. Copperhead presented the witness statements: Louise, Frank, Sandra, Craig. War Chief presented the physical evidence photos, the utility room, the padlock, the deadbolt, the staged bedroom, the financial documents. Agent Voss reviewed it all in silence. Took notes, asked clarifying questions, photographed screens. Finally, she looked up. "This fills a gap we haven't been able to close for 18 months. "What gap?" "We've been investigating Grant Henson since September 2023. We suspected placement fraud but couldn't prove financial motive because we couldn't identify a consistent co-conspirator. Douglas Mercer's name appeared in our files peripherally, but he looked clean. Model foster parent, community leader, impeccable references. We didn't see the pattern because we didn't have access to the laptop showing all 6 victims in one place. She closed her notebook. What you've handed me tonight connects everything. The email trail, the payments, the timeline. It's enough to bring RICO charges, Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. This isn't just murder. It's organized criminal enterprise. War Chief nodded slowly. What do you need from us? Right now? Nothing. You've done more than enough. Arlo Whitfield needs to be interviewed officially, but not tonight. Let the hospital finish medical evaluation first. The other witnesses will need to give formal statements at our field office. I'll have agents coordinate with each of them, and I need that laptop entered into federal evidence chain of custody immediately. One condition, War Chief said. Agent Voss raised an eyebrow. You're negotiating with the FBI? I'm ensuring a child's well-being. Arlo gets a victim advocate assigned before anyone interviews him. No one talks to him without his explicit consent. And he's placed with family, if possible. We've identified his paternal grandmother, Ruth Whitfield, age 71, who's been trying to reach him for 11 months. Douglas told her the counselor recommended no contact. Agreed. All of that is standard victim protection protocol. She paused. And Mr. Drummond? Off the record? Yes, ma'am? The system wasn't broken. That's what people will say when this goes public, but they'll be wrong. A broken system can be fixed. This one worked exactly as designed, built to move slowly, to require proof beyond doubt, to protect the rights of the accused even at the cost of the victim's time. Nobody designed it to be cruel. It just turned out that way sometimes, when the person inside it needed saving faster than the paperwork could catch up. She met his eyes. You didn't replace the system. You bought the time it needed to work. That matters. At 9:47 p.m., they received word from the hospital. Arlo was stable, malnourished, but not critically so. 2 weeks of proper nutrition would restore most of his physical health. The rib fractures were healing on their own. The frostbite on his toes was early stage, treatable. Psychologically, he would need long-term support, but children were resilient, and with proper care. Gravel called War Chief from the hospital. Chief, the doctor wants to keep him overnight for observation and IV fluids. He's asking for Ironside. Tell him Ironside will be there in 15 minutes. At 10:03 p.m., Gideon sat beside Arlo's hospital bed. The room was quiet. Monitors beeping softly. IV in Arlo's arm delivering fluids and nutrients his body desperately needed. The hospital bracelet on his left wrist, the one from 11 months ago, was still there. The nurses had seen it, asked if they should remove it. Arlo had said no. Not yet. You did it, Arlo whispered. You saved me. Gideon shook his head. You saved yourself. You walked across that library. You asked the question. You showed me your truth. All I did was listen. But you believed me. Nobody else believed me. That's on them, not on you. And Arlo, I need you to understand something important. What Douglas did to you wasn't your fault. None of it. Not the hunger, not the locked room, not the belt, none of it. Adults are supposed to protect children. When they don't, when they hurt children instead, that failure belongs to the adults, never to the child. Arlo's eyes filled with tears. He said I was bad. He said my parents would be ashamed of me. He said nobody else wanted me, and that's why my grandma stopped calling. Your grandma never stopped calling. Douglas blocked her calls. She's been trying to reach you for months. And tomorrow, as soon as the doctors say it's okay, you're going to see her? Really? Really. Ruth Whitfield. She lives 23 miles from here. She's been fighting to get custody since the day your parents died, but Douglas told the court she was too old and that you needed a more structured environment. He lied about everything, but that's done now, He can't lie anymore because too many people know the truth. Arlo looked at the hospital bracelet on his wrist, the one from the day his world ended, the one he'd worn like a connection to parents who'd died protecting him in a car accident that had somehow, impossibly, left him alive and them gone. Can I take this off now? Do you want to? I think I do. I kept it because I thought if I took it off, I'd forget them. But I won't forget them. I don't want to keep wearing the day they died. I want to wear the days I lived. Gideon reached over carefully, slowly, letting Arlo see his hands coming. May I? Arlo nodded. Gideon cut the bracelet with surgical scissors a nurse had provided. It fell away. 11 months of wearing grief on his wrist over. Thank you, Arlo whispered. You're welcome. Mr. Ironside? Yeah? Do bikers ever adopt kids like me? Gideon's throat tightened. He thought about Marcus. About the son he'd lost 26 years ago to a system that had failed while he'd been deployed. About the call he'd received in the Gulf, telling him Marcus was gone, and there'd been paperwork issues and delays and excuses, but the end result was a dead child and a father who'd arrived home too late. He'd joined the Hells Angels after leaving the Marines because he'd needed a brotherhood that actually kept its promises. He'd earned his paralegal certificate because he'd needed to understand the legal system that had killed his son. He'd spent 17 years riding with men who'd made the same unspoken vow. No more dead kids. Not on our watch. And now this small boy in a hospital bed was asking if someone like Gideon, scarred, rough-edged, carrying 26 years of grief, could be trusted to love. Yes, Gideon said quietly. We do. But you've got a grandma who loves you and has been fighting for you. She's first, always. Family first. But if something happened and I needed someone, then yes, me. Or any of the 96 brothers who showed up tonight. You're part of this family now, Arlo. Whether you're living with your grandma or somewhere else, you're ours. We protect our own, and you're one of ours. Arlo smiled. A real smile. The first one Gideon had seen from him. At 11:14 p.m., Grant Henson was arrested at his home. FBI agents served the warrant. Charges: conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, racketeering, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of deprivation of rights under color of law. The federal statute for government officials who abuse their position to violate citizens' constitutional rights. At 11:31 p.m., formal federal charges were filed against Douglas Mercer. 4 counts of first-degree murder, Jessica Raines, Marcus Delacroix, Tyler Bowman, and a 4th child whose case file was still being pulled. 3 counts of attempted murder, Arlo Whitfield, plus 2 other victims. 6 counts of fraud, wrongful appropriation of trust funds, conspiracy to commit murder, organized criminal enterprise, child endangerment, unlawful imprisonment, and 14 other charges that would take prosecutors weeks to fully enumerate. No bail, federal hold, trial date pending. The medical report came back on Wednesday morning, January 15th, 16 hours after Arlo had asked 7 words in a library. Dr. Patricia Parker, pediatric specialist, 28 years at Granton Regional Medical, stood in the hospital corridor outside Arlo's room with gravel and read the findings aloud in a voice that was clinically calm but carried an undercurrent of controlled fury. Height, 4 feet 1 inch. Weight, 51 pounds. That's 23 pounds below healthy weight for his age and height. BMI, 13.7. Pediatric critical threshold is 14.5. 2 rib fractures. Left side, approximately 6 weeks old, healing without medical intervention, which means significant pain every time he breathed, coughed, or moved wrong. Early-stage frostbite on 3 toes. Left foot, consistent with prolonged cold exposure in inadequate footwear. Dehydration, moderate. Malnutrition, severe, but not irreversible. Vitamin D deficiency, consistent with minimal outdoor exposure. Signs of chronic stress, elevated cortisol, disrupted sleep patterns, hypervigilance responses. She lowered the clipboard and looked directly at Gravel. This child was being systematically killed. Not quickly, slowly, over months, and at current trajectory, he had maybe 3 more weeks before organ stress became critical. Maybe 4. You got to him just in time. Gravel. Real name Robert Mitchell, 67, Vietnam combat medic who'd seen more death than most people could imagine and had spent 40 years after the war trying to save lives to balance the ones he'd failed to save in rice paddies and jungle clearings. Nodded once. What does he need? Nutritional rehabilitation, structured refeeding protocol to avoid refeeding syndrome. That means small, frequent, nutrient-dense meals for the next 2 weeks, monitored carefully. Physical therapy for the ribs. They'll heal on their own, but he needs exercises to maintain mobility and prevent compensatory movement patterns. Treatment for the frostbite. Minor, we can handle that with topical care. And therapy. Significant, long-term psychological therapy with a trauma-informed specialist who understands complex PTSD in children. We'll make sure he gets all of it. Dr. Parker studied Gravel's face. The age, the scars, the leather vest with patches that marked him as Hell's Angels. The gentleness in his eyes when he'd sat with Arlo through the night, reading to him from a book about submarines, because Arlo had mentioned once that his dad used to read to him before bed. Mr. Mitchell, I've been a pediatrician for 28 years. I've seen a lot of people claim they'll take care of kids. Most of them mean it when they say it. Half of them follow through. You brought this child here last night, stayed with him through every examination, held his hand during the IV insertion, and when he had a panic attack at 2 a.m. because he thought he was back in that utility room, you talked him down in 4 minutes with a calm voice and a promise you'd stay until he fell asleep. That's not performance. That's real. He's real. That makes it easy. At 9:47 a.m., Ruth Whitfield arrived at the hospital. 71 years old. Silver hair cut short. Wearing a practical coat and sensible shoes, carrying a bag that Copperhead had helped her pack with Arlo's favorite things from her house. Things she'd been keeping safe for 11 months, waiting for the day Douglas would let her see her grandson. A photo album from Arlo's parents' wedding. A stuffed dog named Bucket, not the real dog, who died with Arlo's parents in the accident, but a replacement Ruth had bought that looked similar. A blanket Arlo's mother had made when Arlo was born. Things that meant, you were loved before Douglas, and you'll be loved after. Dust Cloud met her in the lobby. Mrs. Whitfield, I'm going to walk you to Arlo's room, but first I need to prepare you for what you're going to see. He's safe now. He's getting excellent medical care. But 11 months with Douglas Mercer left marks, physical marks. He's very thin. He's going to look smaller than you remember, and he's been told that you stopped calling because you didn't love him anymore. Ruth's hands tightened on the bag. That monster told him I abandoned him? Yes, ma'am. So when you see him, the most important thing you can do is tell him the truth. That you never stopped fighting. That Douglas lied. That you love him and you've loved him every single day. Ruth straightened her shoulders. I can do that. They walked to room 317. Dust Cloud knocked softly, opened the door. "Arlo, there's someone here to see you." Arlo was sitting up in bed, IV still in his arm, wearing a hospital gown 3 sizes too big. He looked at the doorway, saw his grandmother, and his face, which had been carefully neutral, guardedly hopeful, crumpled. "Grandma?" "Oh, sweetheart." Ruth crossed the room in 4 steps, set the bag down, wrapped her arms around her grandson as gently as she could manage, while tears streamed down her face. "I'm here. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner. I tried, baby. I tried so hard. He wouldn't let me see you. He told me you didn't want to see me. He lied. But I never stopped trying. Never." Arlo buried his face in her shoulder and sobbed. Not quiet crying, not the controlled tears of a child who'd learned that crying brought punishment. Deep, full-body sobs, 11 months of grief and fear and loneliness pouring out in a grandmother's arms. Dust Cloud stepped back into the hallway, closed the door softly, and let them have privacy. At 11:03 a.m., the legal machinery began turning. Emergency custody granted to Ruth Whitfield, effective immediately. Restraining order filed against Douglas Mercer, 500 yards minimum distance, enforceable even from prison. Victim advocate assigned, Maria Torres, 15 years experience with child trauma cases, Spanish and English speaker, gentle voice, infinite patience. Financial restitution. The $263,400 trust was frozen pending investigation. Every dollar Douglas had stolen would be returned to Arlo's trust, now under independent management with Ruth as custodian. The court appointed a financial guardian to ensure not a single penny went missing this time. Therapy arranged. Dr. Sarah Brennan, child psychologist specializing in complex trauma, agreed to take Arlo's case. Twice weekly sessions to start, tapering as appropriate. Play therapy, art therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, whatever Arlo needed, for as long as he needed it. School coordination. Principal Anderson at Riverside Elementary received notification that Arlo would be returning to school, but with accommodations. A support plan. A counselor check-in. Teachers who understood that a child who'd been starved might hoard food, might flinch at raised voices, might need patience and grace as he learned that the world could be safe again. At 1:34 p.m., they brought Arlo his first real meal. Not hospital food. Rimshot, the youngest brother, 34, who'd grown up with a single mom, who'd sometimes chosen between feeding herself and feeding her kids, and always chose her kids, had gone to a local diner and ordered specifically grilled cheese sandwich, tomato soup, apple slices, chocolate milk. Comfort food. Nothing challenging. Nothing that would overwhelm a stomach that had been empty too long. He brought it to room 317 in takeout containers, knocked softly. Ruth opened the door. "Come in." Rimshot entered, set the bag on the rolling table beside Arlo's bed. "Hey, Arlo, I'm Rimshot. I brought you lunch. Real lunch. Not hospital food. You like grilled cheese?" Arlo nodded, eyes huge. Rimshot unpacked the containers, arranged them carefully. The smell of melted butter and toasted bread filled the room. Warm, rich, safe. Arlo stared at the food like he couldn't quite believe it was real. "It's yours," Rimshot said gently. "All of it. And when you're done, if you're still hungry, I'll go get more. There's no limit. No one's going to take it away. No one's going to punish you for eating. This is what normal looks like, okay?" Arlo picked up half the sandwich with trembling hands, took a small bite, chewed slowly, swallowed. Then another bite. And another. Ruth watched with tears streaming down her face, not bothering to wipe them away. Rimshot stayed for 20 minutes. Didn't hover. Just sat in the chair by the window, scrolling through his phone, present but not intrusive. Creating normalcy. A kid eating lunch while an adult did adult things nearby. No performance, no drama, just safety. When Arlo finished the sandwich and half the soup and 2 apple slices, Rimshot stood. Good job. Doctor says you'll be eating normal-sized meals in about 2 weeks. Until then, small amounts, lots of times per day. Your grandma's got the whole plan. And Arlo? Yeah? You did good, asking for help. That took guts. I'm proud of you. At 3:11 p.m., they finalized the housing arrangement. Ruth's house was a small 2-bedroom ranch on Oakwood Street, 23 miles from Douglas Mercer's house. Far enough that Arlo would never accidentally see him, near enough to Riverside Elementary that Arlo could stay with his same teachers and friends once he was ready to return. But the house needed work. Ruth was on a fixed income. The 2nd bedroom, Arlo's parents' old room from when they'd lived with Ruth during their first year of marriage, had been used for storage for a decade. It needed cleaning, painting, furniture. The Hells Angels. Indiana chapter took care of it in 6 hours. Brimstone organized the work crews. War Chief handled the budget. The chapter had an emergency fund for exactly this kind of situation, $18,300 currently available, earmarked for kids in crisis. They allocated $3,400 for Arlo's room. By 9 p.m. that same night, the room was transformed. Fresh paint, light blue, Arlo's choice, relayed through Ruth. New carpet. A twin bed with a sturdy frame and a NASA-themed comforter that Ruth said Arlo had wanted for his birthday last year, but Douglas had never bought. A desk for homework. A bookshelf. A reading lamp. A wooden sign above the bed that said Arlo's room in hand-carved letters, made by Tank, chapter member and carpenter, who'd lost his own son to foster care in the 90s and had spent 30 years since then building things for other people's kids. Curtains for the window. Dark blue to block out light for sleeping. A small TV on the dresser. A closet full of new clothes, size 8, purchased by 3 brothers who'd pooled money and gone to Target with a list Ruth had provided. Jeans, shirts, underwear, socks, pajamas, a winter coat actually sized for an 8-year-old child. And on the nightstand, the photo album Ruth had brought to the hospital. The stuffed dog named Bucket, and the blanket Arlo's mother had made, washed and folded and ready. When Ruth walked through the door at 9:23 p.m. to inspect the work, she stood in the doorway and wept. This is more than I ever could have done on my own. Brimstone, 73 years old, chapter founder, a man who'd buried 3 brothers and his own daughter and carried grief like a second skeleton beneath his skin, put a hand on her shoulder. You're not on your own. Not anymore. This is what family does. At 4:47 p.m. on Thursday, January 16th, exactly 48 hours after Arlo had asked 7 words in a library, he was discharged from the hospital. Dr. Parker gave Ruth detailed instructions: refeeding protocol, physical therapy exercises, medication schedule for the frostbite treatment, emergency numbers to call if anything seemed wrong. Maria Torres, the victim advocate, would check in daily for the first week, then transition to weekly calls. Dr. Brennan, the therapist, had an appointment scheduled for Monday. Gravel drove them home. Ruth in the passenger seat. Arlo in the back, wearing new clothes that actually fit. Jeans, a sweater, a winter coat that was warm and didn't have holes. The split sneakers were gone, replaced by proper shoes that were the right size. When they pulled into Ruth's driveway, Arlo looked at the house. "I remember this place. Mom and Dad used to bring me here for Sunday dinners." "That's right. And now it's your home, for as long as you need it. Forever, if that's what you want." Gravel carried Arlo's bag, the same backpack he'd been clutching in the library, now containing his new clothes and the hospital discharge papers, and a prescription for the nightmares Dr. Parker said would probably come. Ruth unlocked the front door. Arlo stepped inside. The house smelled like cinnamon. Ruth had been baking, nervous energy channeled into cookies she'd probably give away because she was too anxious to eat. "Your room is down the hall. Second door on the left. I had some help getting it ready. Go look." Arlo walked slowly down the hallway. Ruth and Gravel followed at a distance. He opened the door, stopped, stared. The blue walls. The NASA comforter. The bookshelf full of books. The sign that said his name. The closet full of clothes. The stuffed dog on the bed. He turned to look at his grandmother. This is mine?" "Yes, sweetheart. All yours." "Nobody's going to lock me in?" "Never. There's not even a lock on the door. You can come and go as you please. Kitchen's always open. Food is always available. This is home. Safe home." Arlo walked into the room, set his backpack down, picked up the stuffed dog, and sat on the bed. He looked small in that space. A 51-pound boy in a room built for safety instead of suffering. Gravel crouched in the doorway. "Arlo, I'm going to head out, but I want you to have something." He pulled out a card, handwritten, messy printing. "This has my phone number, War Chief's number, Ironside's number, Rimshot's number, and Dust Cloud's number. 5 brothers. Anytime, day or night, if you need anything or you're scared or you just want to talk, you call. One of us will answer. I promise you that." Arlo took the card carefully. "Thank you." "You're welcome. And Arlo, you're going to have bad days. Days where you remember the utility room. Days where you're scared Douglas will come back even though he's in prison. Days where you don't trust that this is real. That's normal. That's okay. You call us on those days. We'll help you through them." At 6:15 p.m., the brothers gathered one more time at the clubhouse for a final debrief. 97 men who'd dropped everything 27 hours earlier to protect a child they'd never met. Now, exhausted, they sat in that industrial space and listened as War Chief gave the update. "Douglas Mercer is in federal custody. Bail denied. Trial date set for April. The prosecutor's office has indicated they're seeking life without parole on the murder charges. Grant Henson is also in custody. Same charges plus official corruption. Craig Mercer is cooperating. He'll likely get a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony. Sophie Turner and Brandon Kemp, the 2 kids who survived, have been contacted by the FBI. Both confirmed abuse and financial irregularities during their placements. Their testimony will strengthen the case." He paused. "Arlo is home. Safe. With his grandmother. Fully supported. Medical care arranged. Therapy scheduled. School plan in place. Financial trust secured. And he has our numbers if he needs us." Silence. Not uncomfortable. Just the weight of a job finished settling into bones that were tired. Brimstone stood. "I want to say something. I'm 73 years old. I've been riding with this chapter for 40 years. I've seen us do a lot of good. But what we did in the last 48 hours, finding that pattern, gathering that evidence, forcing the system to look at what it had been ignoring, that's the best work we've ever done. 4 kids are dead. We can't bring them back. But we saved Arlo. We saved however many kids Douglas would have targeted next. And we exposed a network that was operating inside the system itself. That matters. Every single brother who showed up, who documented evidence, who knocked on doors, who made calls, who sat with a scared kid in a hospital. You saved a life. Remember that. The room stayed quiet. Then Ironside, Gideon, spoke from the back. I want to add one thing. Arlo asked me if bikers ever help kids like him. I told him we do. But the truth is, we don't help kids like him. We help kids. Period. Every child deserves safety. Every child deserves to be fed, to be warm, to be protected. That's not charity. That's baseline human decency. And when the system fails to provide it, we step in. Not because we're heroes, because we refuse to be bystanders. War Chief nodded. Motion to officially adopt Arlo into the chapter family as a protected member. All in favor? Every hand went up. 97 votes. Unanimous. Recorded. Arlo Whitfield is now under permanent Hells Angels protection. Any threat to him is a threat to this chapter. February 6th, early evening. Gideon sat in his truck across the street from Ruth Whitfield's house, engine off, watching through the living room window. He hadn't planned to be there. He'd been riding through the area, told himself he was just passing through, but somehow ended up parked on Oakwood Street for the third time in 2 weeks. Not checking on Arlo. The kid had his grandmother, had support, didn't need a biker hovering, just wanting to see. Through the window, Arlo sat at the dinner table. A real dinner table. Ruth was serving something from a casserole dish. Normal. Domestic. Safe. Arlo reached for the serving spoon without hesitating, without checking to see if reaching for food would result in punishment. Scooped food onto his plate. Started eating. Gideon watched him chew. Swallow. Reach for a glass of water. Drink. Set it down. No fear. No calculation. Just a kid eating dinner with his grandma on a Tuesday night. The weight in Gideon's chest, the one that had been there since his son Marcus had died 26 years ago in a system that had failed to protect him, shifted slightly. Not gone. It would never be gone. But different. Less crushing. Because this time, the kid lived. This time, the system had been forced to work. This time, there was a boy eating dinner instead of a boy dying in a basement. He started the truck. Didn't honk, didn't wave. Just pulled away from the curb, headed toward the highway, and stopped at a red light 3 blocks later. His phone buzzed. Text from Arlo. Ruth must have given him a phone. Mr. Ironside, Grandma made lasagna. Do you want to come eat with us? Gideon stared at the message. A kid who 3 weeks ago had been locked in a utility room was now inviting him to dinner. Like that was normal. Like that was safe. He typed back. Not tonight. But thank you for asking. Eat extra for me. Response came instantly. Okay, Grandma says you're welcome anytime. Gideon set the phone down. The light turned green. He drove. That night, alone in his apartment, Gideon pulled out the plastic hospital bracelet, the one he'd cut off Arlo's wrist. Arlo had left it on the nightstand when he'd been discharged, forgotten in the chaos of going home. A nurse had given it to Gideon, thinking he'd want to keep it for some reason. He looked at the faded ink. Arlo Whitfield, January 2024. The day his parents had died, and he'd survived. Gideon folded it carefully, put it in an envelope, wrote Arlo's name on the outside. He'd mail it to Ruth's house with a note. You left this behind. Keeping it or throwing it away is your choice. Either way is okay. Ironside. Because that's what it meant to be free. Having the choice. He walked to his bike. The night was cold, clear, stars visible for once. He stood there for a long time, breath misting in the air. Then he got on the bike, started the engine, and rode. March. Arlo was 9, almost 10. He'd gained back the 23 pounds and added 8 more. He'd grown 2 inches. He was in 4th grade at Riverside Elementary, not the same classroom where he'd whispered his plea to Ms. Walsh, but the same school, the same hallways, with teachers who knew his story and made space for his healing. Ruth sat in the audience at the Hardin County Community Center, watching her grandson stand on a small stage with a microphone in front of 140 people. This was the first ever Indiana Foster Care Reform Summit, organized by advocacy groups, attended by caseworkers, foster parents, state legislators, FBI agents who'd worked the Mercer case, and 3 Hells Angels who'd been invited specifically because their involvement had broken the case open. Arlo had asked to speak, not because anyone pushed him, because he'd decided. He wore a button-down shirt Ruth had helped him pick out. His hands shook slightly as he held his notes. Dr. Brennan had helped him write them, but the words were his. My name is Arlo Whitfield. I'm 9 years old. When I was 8, I lived with a man who hurt me and stole from me and was planning to kill me. He hurt other kids before me. 4 of them died. I almost died too. But I didn't, because I got brave for 8 seconds and asked a stranger for help. He looked up from his notes, scanned the crowd, found Gideon in the back row, leather vest and all, arms crossed, face neutral, but eyes focused completely on Arlo. I want to tell you what I learned. I learned that the scariest-looking person in a room can be the safest. I learned that systems are made of people, and people make mistakes, but people can also fix those mistakes if they try hard enough. I learned that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and asking for help anyway. His voice steadied. But here's what I need you to learn. I wasn't the first kid in that house. 4 kids before me died, and everyone thought it was normal. Caseworkers came to that house and saw a locked room and a padlocked kitchen, and they wrote reports that said everything was fine. Why? Because the man hurting us knew how to smile. He knew how to volunteer. He knew how to sit on the same boards that were supposed to check on him. Arlo looked directly at the CPS supervisors in the 3rd row. You have a job that's supposed to protect kids, but you're drowning in paperwork. You have too many cases, and not enough time, and not enough money, and not enough people. I get that. But 4 kids died while you were drowning, and I need you to care about that enough to fix it. Silence in the room. I'm asking you to change the rules. Make surprise home visits mandatory. Make it illegal for someone to review their own placements. Make financial oversight automatic, not optional. Make sure every kid has someone, not a caseworker who sees them once every 6 months, but someone who checks on them every single week. Because if someone had checked on me weekly, they would have seen I was disappearing. And maybe I wouldn't have needed to ask a biker for help. Maybe the system would have worked before I got down to 51 pounds. He folded his notes. That's all. Thank you for listening. The applause started slowly, then built. Ruth was crying. Gideon was stone-faced, but gripping the armrests of his chair hard enough to leave marks. After the summit, a state senator approached Arlo. Son, would you be willing to testify at a committee hearing next month? We're drafting legislation. We need a voice like yours. Arlo looked at Ruth. She nodded. Okay, I'll do it. 6 weeks later, the Arlo-Whitfield Foster Care Accountability Act passed the Indiana State Legislature 47-3. It mandated weekly check-ins for all foster placements under age 12, independent financial oversight for custodial guardianships, and prohibited any individual from serving on oversight boards reviewing their own cases. Governor signed it May 15, 2027. The pen used to sign it was later given to Arlo, mounted in a display frame with a plaque reading, "Because one child refused to stay silent." Now, Arlo was 14. A freshman at Granton High School. Honor roll student. Member of the debate team. Taller now, 5'6", still growing. The physical scars were gone. The psychological ones would never fully disappear, but they'd transformed from open wounds into old aches that only hurt when the weather changed. He volunteered at the Hardin County Foster Care Advocacy Center every Saturday, the same center where his gray hoodie now hung in a memorial display alongside Tyler Bowman's school photo, Jessica Raines's drawing, and Marcus Delacroix's favorite book. 4 children who'd died. One who'd lived to tell the story. This particular Saturday, January 11th, Arlo was organizing donated winter coats when the center's director, Ms. Patterson, approached him. "Arlo, there's a girl in the intake room, 11 years old. Just came out of a bad placement. Police removed her this morning. She's asking for you specifically. Says she heard you speak at her school last year. Will you talk to her?" Arlo set down the coat he'd been folding. Of course. The girl, name tag said Emma K., sat in a chair that was too big for her, holding a backpack against her chest the way Arlo had held his in that library 6 years ago. She was small. Too small. Eyes that tracked movement before people finished moving. Arlo recognized everything. He pulled a chair close, sat down at her level. "Hi, Emma. I'm Arlo. Ms. Patterson said you asked for me. You gave a talk at my school in October. You said you lived with someone who hurt you and locked you in a room, and you said you asked a biker for help and he helped you. That's true. All of it. Did you think he wouldn't believe you?" Arlo thought about that question, about standing in a library at 4:23 p.m. on a Tuesday in January, wearing shoes that were too small and a hoodie he'd worn for 23 days straight, walking across 22 feet of worn carpet to ask a stranger with a scarred face and anchor tattoos if bikers ever helped kids like him. "Yeah, I thought he might tell me to go away, or call my foster dad, or just ignore me. I thought nobody would believe me because 4 other people already hadn't." "But he believed you?" "He did. First person who did." Emma's grip on her backpack tightened. "The lady who took me from my placement this morning, she said I have to tell someone everything that happened, every bad thing. But I don't know if I can. It's too much. And what if they don't believe me anyway?" Arlo leaned forward slightly. "Emma, I'm going to tell you something that's really important. You don't have to tell everything all at once. You can tell it in pieces, small pieces, one truth at a time. And if the first person doesn't believe you, you tell a second person, and a third. You keep telling until someone listens. Because here's what I learned. The truth doesn't go away just because someone doesn't want to hear it. It just waits until you find someone who will." "What if I can't find that person?" "You already did. You're talking to me. And I believe you. Every word. Without even hearing the details yet, I believe that something bad happened to you. Because I know what something bad looks like. I lived it." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "They locked the pantry. I got so hungry." Arlo's chest tightened. "I know. Me too. And they said nobody would believe me because I was a bad kid. You're not a bad kid. The people who hurt you, they were bad adults. That's not the same thing. Emma started crying. Quietly at first, then harder. Arlo didn't touch her. Didn't try to make it stop. Just sat there, present. The way Gideon had sat with him in that hospital room. The way Gravel had sat with him through medical exams. The way Dust Cloud had sat with him when the nightmares got bad. Just present. Just witnessing. When Emma's crying slowed, Arlo said quietly, "Do you want me to stay while you talk to Ms. Patterson? I can sit with you. I won't interrupt. I'll just be there." "Would you?" "Of course." They walked together to the intake office. Ms. Patterson saw them coming, understood immediately, pulled a second chair into the room without being asked. Arlo sat beside Emma while she told her story. Piece by piece. Small truths building into a larger truth that Ms. Patterson documented carefully, thoroughly, with the kind of attention that meant this time, someone was listening. Gideon stood in the memorial room at the Hardin County Foster Care Advocacy Center on a Tuesday evening in March 2032, alone. The center had closed 20 minutes ago, but the director had given him a key years back, told him he was welcome any time. He came once a month, never told anyone, just stood in that room with the photos and the displays and the framed Arlo Whitfield Foster Care Accountability Act, and remembered. The gray hoodie hung in a climate-controlled case, worn, frayed at the cuffs. The same hoodie Arlo had worn for 23 consecutive school days before Ms. Walsh finally understood what she was looking at. Beside it, Tyler Bowman's school photo. Age 9, smiling, alive in that picture, dead 4 years later in February snow wearing only underwear. Beside that, Jessica Raines's drawing of a house with a family standing in front. She'd drawn it a week before she drowned in a bathtub that Douglas Mercer claimed he'd left unattended for only a moment. Beside that, Marcus Delacroix's favorite book, Where the Wild Things Are. Found in the basement where he'd fallen downstairs that should have had a safety gate, but somehow didn't. 4 children dead. 1 child saved. Gideon's phone buzzed. Text from Arlo. "Hey, Mr. Ironside. Helped a girl today who's going through what I went through. Thought you'd want to know. She's safe now." Gideon stared at that message for a long time. Arlo helping someone else. The cycle broken. The wound transformed into wisdom, into action, into the kind of strength that only comes from surviving something that should have killed you and deciding to use that survival to protect others. He typed back, "Proud of you. That's the work that matters." 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then, "Learned it from watching you." Gideon put the phone away, looked at the memorial wall one more time. His son Marcus had died in foster care 32 years ago. Gideon hadn't been there, hadn't been able to protect him, hadn't even known he was in danger until it was too late. But because Marcus died, Gideon joined the Hell's Angels. Because Gideon joined, he was in that library on a Tuesday in January. Because he was in that library, Arlo lived. Because Arlo lived, Emma would live. Because Emma would live, however many kids she helped in her future would have a chance. The math didn't erase the loss. Marcus was still dead. Tyler, Jessica, Marcus Delacroix were still dead. Nothing changed that. But the pattern had been stopped. The network dismantled. The laws changed. The system forced to look at what it had been ignoring. That wasn't redemption. Redemption wasn't possible. But it was meaning. Purpose pulled from grief. Action built on the foundation of failure. Gideon walked out of the memorial room, locked the door behind him, walked to his motorcycle in the parking lot. The night was cold, clear, stars visible. He got on the bike, started the engine, felt the familiar rumble beneath him. And he thought, every kid deserves someone who shows up. Every single one. That was the truth he'd learned through losing Marcus and finding Arlo. Not that you could save everyone, but that you tried anyway. You showed up. You listened. You refused to look away. That was the work. He rode home through empty streets, leather vest keeping the cold at bay, and for the first time in 32 years, the weight in his chest felt like something he could carry. This story isn't really about bikers or patches or 97 motorcycles roaring into a library parking lot. It's about an 8-year-old boy who got brave for 8 seconds. It's about a man who'd lost his own son and refused to let another child slip through. It's about a system that failed 4 times and was forced to work on the 5th. And it's about the simple, devastating truth that evil doesn't announce itself. It wears reading glasses. It volunteers at hospitals. It runs scout troops and sits on boards and smiles in photos and knows exactly which words to say to make people look away. But here's what Douglas Mercer never understood. Evil only wins when communities choose silence, when neighbors decide it's not their business, when professionals accept the first explanation instead of asking the second question, when a child's cry for help gets routed to the person hurting them, when one person, a teacher, a biker, a grandmother, a witness, decides enough is enough and refuses to accept the comfortable lie, evil loses its camouflage. If you've ever felt invisible, this story is for you. Because Arlo felt invisible for 11 months until someone counted. If you've ever doubted that one person can make a difference, this story is for you. Because Gideon was just one man reading a book in a library who made the choice to listen. If you've ever looked at someone covered in scars and leather and assumed danger, this story is for you. Because the men who saved Arlo looked like nightmares, but acted like angels. There are Arlos everywhere, in foster homes, in schools, in locked rooms, while adults who are supposed to protect them plan their deaths. Children disappearing in plain sight while communities make excuses. You don't need 97 motorcycles to change a story. You need to pay attention. Count the days when you see a child wearing the same clothes. Notice when someone flinches. Ask the uncomfortable question. Care enough to intervene even when your voice shakes. Listen when a child hesitates. Believe them the first time they tell you. Be the person who shows up. Because the difference between Arlo thriving today and Arlo dying in that utility room came down to one choice. A scared kid walked 22 feet and asked for help. And a scared-looking man decided to answer. If this story moved you, subscribe to Valiant Bikers and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, who was your Gideon? Who showed up when nobody else did? Or if you're still waiting for someone to notice, tell us your city. This community is watching. You are not invisible. We'll be back next week with another story about people who showed up when systems failed. Until then, remember, heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather. Sometimes they carry notebooks. Sometimes they're just ordinary people who refused to look away. Stay gentle. Stay vigilant. Stay ready to show up.